Interesting Times with host Timothy Kelly, who interviews today's top alternative and revisionist thinkers.
May you live in interesting times.
My guest this evening is James Perloff. James Perloff is the author of The Shadows of Power, an expose on the Council of Foreign Relations. He also is the author of Truth is a Lonely Warrior, his most recent book. He also worked on I think he wrote the screenplay for Shattering, a documentary, latest documentary offering by Free Mind Films. His website is jamesperloff.com. James, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing real good, and it's good to be on your show. Interesting Times. I was noticing before I came on all the interesting guests, as usual, that you've had on. I noticed you had a show on Castro as a CFR agent, and I'm kind of interested to listen to that one because I've been kind of aware of Castro's U.S. connections ever since I read Mario Lazo's book, Dagger in the Heart, which was written back in 1968, about how the U.S. actually put Castro in power. But that's for another time.
Yes. Now, you have a recent piece here regarding Christian Zionism. The Abomination of Christian Zionism, I think is the title. Mm-hmm. And, of course, you suggested that as a prelude to that subject that we discussed your earlier piece, is producing a one-world religion. It's a sort of a multi-step plan that you identify here. So, how do you want to get into this? Christian Zionism and one-world religion, and the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, I guess. How does that relate?
Okay. Well, it's actually a two-part article, I guess you could say. It's called The War on Christianity, Part 1 and Part 2, two separate posts. We're going to be talking tonight mostly about Part 2, which is on Christian Zionism, which embedded itself in the fundamentalist movement. But I thought, to be fair to the fundamentalists, since they are people who say they believe in the Bible, we should first talk about the worst side, which is the modernist movement that the Rockefellers founded, and that's found in Part 1 of my article, The War on Christianity. And just to put this in context, I know most of your listeners are familiar with the idea of the New World Order. And New World Order is based on consolidation of power. And so you see the EU being consolidated, the Europe is being consolidated under the EU. You see NAFTA being an attempt to consolidate North America into a North American Union. These are all regional stepping stones toward the world government, which the League of Nations and UN were formative steps towards. And this is all leading us towards really what the Bible would tell us is an end-time scenario where we have a Antichrist figure who will govern the entire world. To govern the world, you need a world government. Well, besides consolidating nations, they consolidate other things to get power over the world. For example, corporations. We have these 6 big corporations controlling all the media in America today. But if you go back to 1983, there were 50. And you see banks consolidating and multinational corporations consolidating were run by fewer and fewer corporations. Well, in the religious field, they want a one-world religion, and that has meant consolidating the faiths, and that is where ecumenicism comes in. And the Rockefellers had a big hand in that. And the problem with Christianity was to bring us together with other religions in a one world religion would be a problem because Christianity is so unique. I mean, it is not really to the degree that other religions are, a works-based religion. We have Jesus Christ's death on the cross, the basis of our salvation in Jesus Christ. His resurrection is our hope, and that is very unique. And so, from the Rockefeller-Rothschild perspective, it was necessary to destroy Christianity's fundamental doctrines, to water it down, make it more like other religions so that it could be then blended together in this one world religion. And that's where the Rockefellers came in. The Rothschilds felt they couldn't do it because they were Jewish and it looked strange if they started funding seminaries. But so the Rockefellers took the lead in that in America. And so they started funding seminaries like Union Theological in New York City because they knew that the best way to change the church was to get to the seminarians, to get to the future theologians of America. What did modernism say? Modernism said this. This is starting about the 1890s, okay? It said that the Bible was not the Word of God. It was full of mistakes, that most of the books were not written by the purported authors, that Jesus Christ never did any miracles, there was no virgin birth, there was no resurrection, there ain't going to be no second coming, Jesus did not die on the cross in atonement for our sins, and even raised the question whether or not even existed. Now, I don't know if you've been to Bible studies, Tim, but, if in Bible studies I've gone to, it's typical that people will debate over certain areas of Scripture, like maybe the writings of the Apostle Paul. There might be some area where his advice is open to interpretation, like when he advised Timothy that he could drink wine for his stomach. Some people might say, well, that shows the Bible says it's okay to drink alcohol, and other people would say, no, that was just for his, there's some areas that are debatable. But this wasn't that kind of ideological process going on. The modernists were actually denying every fundamental doctrine, the basic doctrines of Christianity. And again, this was begun by Charles Augustus Briggs, who was a graduate and professor at Union Theological Seminary. But just to show how the Rockefellers were tied to this directly.
I'm sorry, this is what became known as the higher criticism?
Yeah, higher criticism of the Bible.
Okay.
There was a landmark sermon given in 1922 at the First Presbyterian Church of New York by Harry Emerson Fosdick, and he attacked the fundamentals of the Bible. He attacked the Bible being God's Word. He said there was no virgin birth. He said there was no second coming, and he denied that Christ's death on the cross was atonement for sin, and he said that people who held these views were intolerant. Well, the congregation was naturally very upset, and they held a heresy hearing, and he was expelled as pastor of that church. Well, guess what? Guess who hired him to be pastor of his church? None other than John D. Rockefeller himself at the church he'd built, Riverside Church in New York, at a cost of $4 million in 1920s dollars. And John D. Rockefeller paid for 130,000 copies of that sermon to be distributed to Protestant ministers. And to really tie it together, Harry Emerson Fosdick's brother, Raymond Fosdick, was the president of the Rockefeller Foundation. And you can see throughout time, you'll see that modernism has continued. You see, for example, the Jesus Seminar, where they said that 80% of the things the Bible says Jesus said, he never said. You see the Da Vinci Code, which is just modernism repackaged, just saying there was no resurrection, right? That Jesus married Mary Magdalene and all of that garbage. Okay. So, but along with that, there was one other thing I should mention that the Rockefellers were doing. To create a one-world religion, you need a structure. You need to have a structure by which denominations and religions can unite. So they formed the Federal Council of Churches, which became what we today call the National Council of Churches in 1908. And running that, they picked their man, John Foster Dulles. Now, John Foster Dulles was an in-law of the Rockefellers. That is to say, his wife, Janet, was a first cousin to the Rockefellers. And to give an idea of how much a globalist John Foster Dulles was, he was, besides being the attorney who had defended Harry Emerson Fosdick at his heresy trial, he was the legal counsel at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, which proposed the League of Nations. He was chairman of the trustees of the Rockefeller Foundation, where Raymond Fosdick was president. He was a founding member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He contributed many articles to Foreign Affairs, but started with the very first issue of Foreign Affairs, which is the Journal of the Council on Foreign Relations, in 1922. He helped write the UN Charter. He was the chairman of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where he chose as president of that body Alger Hiss, the communist spy. He became Secretary of State under Eisenhower, while his brother, Allen Dulles, was head of the CIA and president of the Council on Foreign Relations. I guess you could say it was establishment, right, Timothy? But he was big in the World Council of Churches, and in 1948 he traveled to Amsterdam to help found the World Council of Churches because the Rockefellers weren't satisfied to bring the denominations of America together. They wanted all the world's denominations coming together, and that was funded by the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations, which Dulles was part of, and the director of research at the Amsterdam Conference was John C. Bennett, who was president of Union Theological Seminary, funded by the Rockefellers, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So you see the political and the religious tying together here for one world religion. And just to kind of wrap it up, I'd like to mention that Tony Blair formed after he was prime minister, formed the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. This is a guy who refused to give a 20-minute speech on world hunger because he wouldn't be paid £330,000. That's real Christian, right? Okay. He said on the website, quote, "I launched the Tony Blair Faith Foundation to promote respect, friendship, and understanding between the major faiths. I've always believed that faith should be an essential part of the modern world as globalization pushes us ever closer." And he had a social actions project page on his website that said, quote, "I commit to working together with people of all faiths to fight against disease and poverty," unquote. Apparently he didn't care much about poverty when they wouldn't pay him £330,000. But nonetheless, you see how this has gone. Ecumenicism, driving the world's religions together. Forget what your doctrine says. Well, let's just work all together for a one world religion. The Rockefellers have been behind it. That's the modernist side. That's what I cover in part one. But our real focus tonight is going to be the crime of Christian Zionism, which infiltrated the other side. You know, the people rebelled against modernism, rebelled against these attacks on the major parts of the Christian faith, were called fundamentalists because they said, hey, you know what? We're going to stand by the Bible. We're going to stand by the fundamentals. But what they didn't know was they're being set up because the Rothschilds like to fund both sides of wars, and that included the modernist fundamentalist war, and the fundamentalists were taken in by what was called the Scofield Reference Bible, and that's going to be a big part of our talk tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess, one thing, interesting point you do make is that the issue of consolidation is they're taking the same approach to economics under the guise of so-called free trade.
Right.
They're creating
World Trade Organization. Yeah.
World Trade Organization. One world currency, right?
Right. Euro, Amero, one world currency. Yeah.
And you also have the move towards political consolidation and destruction of borders and national sovereignty and creation of the World Federalist Society, these outfits. And so, there's no reason to expect that religion, of course, every reason to expect that religion would be involved in this because religion holds such a sway over people's imaginations and thoughts. And obviously an obstacle from a globalist perspective from the New World Order would be the separate religions dividing the peoples.
Correct.
Yeah. And so they need to, I guess, sort of meld everything down, turn it into sort of this globular, watered down, social gospel type religion where all distinctions all meaningful distinctions have been melted down, and you just have this, this one world, really fuzzy notion of spirituality, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what they're after. Blur those distinctions, just as you're blurring them between the national boundaries, and then you have once you consolidate, then you can have your Antichrist figure, your global dictator ruling the world. You've got to have the people united in some way for this to occur. But, of course, you divide them first. Yeah. You break them up first, and then once they've been divided and split and confused, then you bring them together.
And in the same way that they blamed nationalism or patriotism for the world wars.
Right.
They'll blame – this is constant meme that's out there, or you hear people say this all the time, that religion has caused more death. People who kill for religion more than any other idea out there, and it's the religious differences that divide people. We need to do with it. If you just do away with those differences,
perfect analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that meme is out there. Of course, what the reality is that it's the exploitation of patriotism, exploitation of nationalism, and the exploitation of religion by these higher forces, by the elite.
Oh, you've nailed it. You've nailed it. And Rudolf Rummel, a professor emeritus at the University of Hawaii, pointed out that although they like to say that nationalism is causing wars and war is the most horrible thing in the world, he pointed out that in the 20th century, 6 times more people were killed by governments than were killed by wars. And so actually, you got a one-world government, you better watch out.
And it's the great centralizers that have had the most blood on their hands.
Yes.
Stalin or Abraham Lincoln. It's the great centralizers, and it's the state itself. You mentioned, Rummel and his democide, and obviously the biggest killers out there. The biggest violation of human rights have always been governments, big governments, by the way. So, and this isn't to say there aren't problems at the local level, but I'm saying the solution isn't a all-powerful centralized state, nor are the solution to religious differences is an imposition or destruction of the various faiths and religions, especially if it's done through malfeasance and social engineering, and as opposed to conversion, right? I mean, obviously, everyone who practices a faith by virtue of their faith means that they believe that their faith is the one true faith. It doesn't necessarily mean that you believe in conflict and forced conversions and things like that. So, which is actually a violation of Christian doctrine, particularly Catholic doctrine. Okay, so. You brought up the Scofield Bible, and his role in I guess Christian Zionism and the overall Zionist project, and the Zionist project's role in the New World Order. So let's get into that.
Okay, it's funny. I just did a show on this with your friend Dean Arnold, as we were talking about off air, and we were given caveats at the beginning. We had all these caveats. We're joking about the number of caveats, but one of my caveats is that people who criticize Zionism, there is a sort of automatic suspicion that you're motivated by anti-Semitism. So I like to start out at these broadcast outsets by pointing out that I'm half Jewish myself. The Perloff family was originally Perlovsky. We were Russian Jews. My mother was not Jewish. But I am half Jewish. I'm not motivated by anti-Semitism. We're just looking for the truth here. I'm against racism in any way, shape, or form. So let's just get that off the table.
Well, Zionism is a political doctrine and ideology, and it should not be immune to criticism or critique. I mean,
correct.
If anything, turnabout's fair play. I mean, talk about critique. I mean, the Jews critique a lot. So.
Oh yeah, we'll get into that most likely tonight. What the Talmud really says about other people's non-Jews. But I should mention to get into the background of Christian Zionism. It really begins with before Scofield, with a guy named John Nelson Darby. Darby and Scofield being a disciple of Darby, developed this was called dispensationalism. Darby's called the father of dispensationalism, but also out of this came our Christian Zionism. And what their theology claimed was a number of things. And for our purposes tonight, one of the main claims was that God wanted the Jews to return to Palestine and take it over. They also had other things like God has 2 plans of salvation, one for the Jews and one for the rest of us. And they also said that Christians should not involve themselves with worldly matters. We should separate ourselves. We shouldn't get behind a movie camera or be involved in the arts or business or politics, but we should leave those worldly things to worldly people. And you can see what the result has been of that doctrine in America. And they also said
Hollywood.
Yeah. Movies could be pretty good if go back to the golden age of television. There were very positive TV shows back then. Movies can be positive, but we've left them in the hands of the Satanists.
That's because the religionists were actively involved in curbing Hollywood, whether it's the
Catholics and Protestants originally both were.
Yeah, Legions of Decency and
good stuff. Well, anyway, they also said that there were dispensational ages, and I don't mind people dividing history into different ages if they want to, but the main thing from our perspective is they said that Jesus was not coming at the end of the world. He was only coming at the end of this particular age, which is a 6 of 7. And they said at the end of this age, Jesus is going to come back and he's going to rule from Jerusalem as a messianic king here on earth, an earthly king for 1,000 years. This is also part and parcel of the theology that they taught and is still taught to this day. Now, let's talk about how this fits into the world government scenario. The Bible does talk about the beast governing the world. We need the world government. Every government's got a capital. Our capital in America is in Washington, but the capital of the world government is going to be in Jerusalem. Menachem Begin, the first prime minister of Israel, said as much, and the Rothschilds have always intended that the center of their world government, their police state, would be Jerusalem. And this is why Theodor Herzl began hosting these Zionist congresses in Switzerland in 1897. And this is why you had the Balfour Declaration of 1917, whereby the British government promised the Zionist Federation, this declaration was specifically addressed to Lord Walter Rothschild, that the British would establish a homeland for Jews in Palestine. This is the beginning of modern Israel and the modern Zionist state. And this was in return for bringing America into the First World War on Britain's side.
Now, how did that actually play out? How did, I know this was Chaim Weizmann, I think?
Chaim Weizmann.
Yeah.
Well, the official story given to the public was that in return for, I think it was Weizmann developing a gunpowder the British could use, but the real deal behind the scenes, and this is affirmed by the Secretary of the Zionist Congress, Samuel Landman, that the real deal was they would bring Woodrow Wilson and the Americans in. And of course, our declaration of war was in 1917, the same year as the Balfour Declaration. So that was the deal. That was the trade-off. That was the quid pro quo.
Now, was this because Wilson was surrounded by some influential Zionists?
Yeah, you might say that. Samuel Untermeyer, who we'll be getting into tonight, and of course, Edward Mandell House, and the whole bankster dynasty, Jacob Schiff, and all those people were pushing for Bernard Baruch, who he appointed, head of the War Industries Board, and made hundreds of millions of dollars in war profits for goods that were never delivered to our soldiers on the front, who were making $30 a month while they risked their life.
Morgenthau Sr., I think.
Oh, yeah, he was in there.
Brandeis, right?
Judge Brandeis was the one who Samuel Untermeyer blackmailed Wilson to put in the Supreme Court.
And wasn't Wilson also? Yeah, right. He was blackmailed because Wilson had some lady problems, right?
Yeah, he had. Yeah, like so many people do. But
now this is funny.
Not the Bill Clinton, not the first politician.
Oh no. But this is interesting because all this pressure is being brought to bear in the United States by these supposedly disparate people. So there has to be an organization here, right?
Oh. Sure, and that became really consolidated as the Council on Foreign Relations at the end of World War I, and that sort of formalized it. And of course, the Council's, which is the subject of my book, The Shadows of Power, has produced the majority of our Secretaries of State, Secretaries of Defense, CIA directors, and Treasury secretaries. But this is the banks, the community. These are the guys who formed the Federal Reserve. And they secured all kinds of promises from Woodrow Wilson before he ran for president. And remember, the guy had no political background before he ran, except for 1 year as governor of New Jersey, which is just token, so he'd have some kind of political background.
Right, and they recruited Teddy Roosevelt, right?
Yeah, they recruited Teddy Roosevelt to break up the Republicans in 1912 so that Wilson could get elected he got elected with only 42% of the popular vote. But anyway, to bring us back to the New World Order and this idea of Jerusalem and the Zionism and the Jews taking over, the Zionists, the Rothschilds, knew they could not do this without the consent of the Christian community. And to get the Christians to consent, that's where the Scofield Reference Bible came in. That was its purpose. Was to change Christian theology. So let me just mention.
So basically, you're suggesting that the Scofield Bible, which I hear a lot about, and just till fair, at least I read your article. Like, oh yeah, okay. This is sort of I guess you could say, was a black op against the evangelical fundamentalist community. Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it. I think I'll steal that.
Okay.
Okay. just mentioned Scofield's mentor, John Nelson Darby, 1800 to 1882. Scofield's 1843 to 1921. Now, John Nelson Darby, first read about him in the works of John Coleman, the former MI6 officer, who's written a lot about the Committee of 300. And in his books, I learned that Darby was, number one, a Satanist, number two, a Freemason, and number three, an employee of the British East India Company owned by the Rothschilds. And actually, if you want some evidence that he was a Freemason, just take a look at the fact that he calls God the architect. That's the Freemasonic designation for God. And he also had a satanic Bible. And if you go to my website, jamespoloff.com, and click on the article on Christian Zionism, I hyperlink there to a major post at another website that goes through the entire Darby Bible. He translated the Bible satanically, and as an example of that, if you look at, I'll give you one verse here. This is from John 6:69. Peter said to Jesus, now this is from the King James, he said, quote, and we believe and are sure that thou art that Christ, the Son of the living God, unquote. Okay, now Darby, here's how he translated it. And we are believed and known that thou art the Holy One of God, unquote. Now, this is going to go right by the average Christian, but here's the thing. Holy One of God in the King James, that phrase is only used by demons. So what Darby was doing was taking the words of demons and putting them in the mouth of the Apostle Peter, and he did that throughout his whole Bible. But you hyperlink to the article. We're not going to dwell on it here, but he was a Satanist, okay, and he's the mentor for Cyrus Scofield. So let's move up to Scofield, okay, who wrote the Scofield Reference Bible, which birthed Christian Zionism. Now, Scofield started out as a crook. He was a politician in Kansas, which was very crooked in that era. We're talking the 1870s. And I'm going to quote from a Kansas newspaper, the Atchison Globe, 1881, quote, C.I. Scofield was appointed United States District Attorney for Kansas in 1873 and turned out worse than any other Kansas official, is now a preacher in Missouri. His wife and two children live in Atchison. He contributes nothing to their support except good advice, unquote. Now, that same year, the Topeka Daily Capital said, quote, Cyrus Scofield, formerly of Kansas, late lawyer, politician, and shyster generally, has come to the surface again and promises once more to gather around him that halo of notoriety that made him so prominent in the past. The last personal knowledge that Kansans had of this peer among scalawags was about 4 years ago after a series of forgeries and confidence games. He left the state and a destitute family and took refuge in Canada. For a time he kept undercover, nothing being heard of him until within the past 2 years he turned up in St. Louis, where he had a wealthy widowed sister living, who's generally come to the front and squared up Cyrus's little follies and foibles by paying good round sums of money. Within the past year, however, Cyrus committed a series of St. Louis forgeries that could not be settled so easily, and the erratic young gentleman was compelled to linger in the St. Louis jail for 6 months, unquote. Okay, Tim, now, all of a sudden, he's out of jail, and all of a sudden his charges are dropped, and there's an excellent book. If people want to know about Cyrus Scofield, there's a book that I recommend among any other. It's quite long. Well, I mean, by some standards, 400 pages. It's The Incredible Scofield in his book by Joseph M. Canfield. It's the most detailed biography. But he says here, quote, the very sudden dropping of criminal charges without proper adjudication suggests that Scofield's career was in the hands of someone who had clout, unquote. Now, allegedly, he converts to Christ in 1879 in his law office, but that's a little bit, I won't say that he didn't convert to Christ because only God knows his heart, but he should not have had a St. Louis law office because he was not a member of the Missouri Bar. He very quickly advances as a pastor. In 1881, he's already a St. Louis pastor. And then in 1882, moves down to Dallas and becomes pastor of the First Congregational Church. Now, this is speculation, but people who've analyzed this believe he probably moved to Texas because his criminal background and his abandonment of his family was too well known in Missouri and Kansas. So he had to get out of that region where his background was known. And I should also mention that in his congregation in Dallas were some heavy-duty power brokers, such as the Dealey family. You've heard of Dealey Plaza and the Dealeys. They owned the Dallas Morning News. So, and they were connected apparently to Freemasonry. And we don't have evidence that Scofield was a Freemason, but we're going to see that hidden hands start to move him around. And you can interrupt me, by the way, anytime. At this point,
well, whenever someone experiences a meteoric rise, despite a questionable background, it's reason to suspicion that he's being sponsored for some reason by higher powers.
That's right, and we're going to see evidence for that. I want to mention here, because I know that Scofield's defenders would say something like this at this point. Well, it doesn't matter that he had a background of forgeries and confidence games and jail time, because many sinners have turned to Christ and become born again and forgiven of their sins, and that is absolutely true. But the problem is that Scofield continues to have issues even after he became a pastor. Okay, he became a pastor in Dallas in 1882. Meanwhile, 1883, his wife divorced him for abandoning her and their two daughters, Abigail and Helene. And the court ruled that Scofield was, quote, not a fit person to have custody of the children, unquote. This is a pretty sharp indictment. In fact, here's what the Bible says, 1 Timothy 5:8, quote, but if any provide not for his own, especially for those of his own house, he is denied the faith and is worse than an infidel, unquote. Now, Scofield has abandoned his family. He marries a new wife within 6 months of this divorce. And also, what do you expect if somebody's converted, they're going to be truthful? Now, I'll give you a couple of examples of Scofield not being very truthful after he is a pastor. After he became famous, he wrote a biography for an entry for Who's Who in America. And here's how he described his military service in the Confederate Army. Quote, Private Company 8th, 7th Infantry, Tennessee, May 1861 to close of Civil War, served in Army of Northern Virginia under General Lee and awarded Cross of Honor for valor at Battle of Antietam, unquote. Okay, now here's some problems. He was in the Confederate Army in the 7th Tennessee, but he begged out in 1862. He did not serve to the end of the war. He begged out on the grounds that he was Michigan-born, and that was true. As far as serving under General Lee, as Canfield notes, this was only in the same sense that, quote, GIs in World War II were under Eisenhower. He's sort of suggesting he was close to Lee, but he's not. But here's the thing. He says he was awarded the Cross of Honor for valor at the Battle of Antietam. What's notable here is that the South did not give out medals and ribbons, and you won't see them usually on pictures of old Confederates, because that was a frill the Confederacy could not afford. The South was very poor. They didn't give out medals. The Cross of Honor was actually a medal that was given by the Daughters of the Confederacy starting in the year 1900 to dishonorably discharged Confederate veterans, and that he was. But it was not a medal for valor in battle. That was not a truthful statement. I should mention he was at the Battle of Antietam, apparently because his regiment was there. And he may have fought valorously, but he's certainly stretching the truth to say he was, decorated for valor there. But here's the thing that really I consider to be discreditable. Starting in 1892, he started to refer to himself as Dr. Scofield, and in the Scofield Reference Bible, it says Reverend C.I. Scofield, D.D., Doctor of Divinity. Okay, so where does this degree come from? In his Who's Who biography, he does not mention where it came from, and he has no educational background. He never went to seminary. He never went to university. People have suggested he could have been given an honorary one, but if that's the case, you'd think he would mention it in Who's Who, where he got it from. You would also think that with such a famous theologian, whatever a seminary or theological institute gave him this degree would have come forward and proudly announced it, but nobody did. Also, dispensationalism, his views were very unorthodox in 1892, so it's very unlikely that any standardized, accredited school would have given him an honorary doctorate in that year. So there's no evidence that he actually had a doctorate, and so again, his credibility is cast in doubt. But by the way, I should mention, why did he need this doctorate? Well, to put out this Scofield Reference Bible, it had to appear that it was the work of a scholar. But he was uneducated, and he had no formal education in Greek, Aramaic, or Hebrew, the ancient languages that the scriptures were written in. But they had to make it look that way. They had to make it look like this was the work of a scholar.
So is he a straw man, like a put up for it, a name, and do you think other people actually produce the actual text?
I think that as a pastor, he obviously preached sermons, and he actually preached for the same pulpit in St. Louis where Darby had spoken, and I'm sure he had some schooling. No doubt he had some schooling in theology, no doubt about it. He would have borrowed from Darby. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that, because he produced his Bible so fast that he must have had some help. But we're about to transition to that. Let's mention his connections now. 1901, he moves up to, he moved to New England a little prior to this, 1896. But in 1901, he became a member of the Lotos Club. This is particularly suspect because the Lotos Club was a hangout. It was an exclusive club for the financial elite and the literary elite. Now, the members included people like Mark Twain, Arthur Hayes Sulzberger, who owned the New York Times, Margaret Mead, the advocate of sexual liberation, Andrew Carnegie, who was an atheist, as well as being, a multimillionaire and head of the, started the Carnegie Foundation. This is the last place you would ever find a fundamentalist preacher. This is the type of place they would laugh at a fundamentalist preacher, and the membership dues were equal to 1/5 of his salary as a preacher. Yet he was a member till his death in 1921, so for 20 years he's a member. And you have to start to wonder. And it turns out that his membership in the club was approved by the head of the literary committee, was Samuel Untermeyer, who we already mentioned once tonight. Now, Untermeyer it's probably reasonable to say, the number one Zionist in America in the 20th century. So let's just back that up. He was the president of Keren Hayesod, which was the chief fundraiser for Zionism in Israel. He played a big role in drafting the Federal Reserve Act. He was an attorney. We already mentioned he blackmailed Woodrow Wilson to accept Louis Brandeis into the Supreme Court. And he also was the prime mover of the Jewish declaration of war on Germany in 1933. When I say declaration of war, I'm talking about an economic boycott which kind of provoked the tensions between the Germans and the Jews in Germany. So he is America's top Zionist, and is it a coincidence that America's top Zionist would approve into the Lotos Club the membership of the man who then gave us the Bible that birthed Christian Zionism? I do not believe that is a coincidence, Tim.
Yeah, I understand why. Coincidences don't just happen. So, Untermeyer Park, right? That's the New York City. It's named after him, right?
Which park?
Untermeyer Park. Isn't there a park named after him?
I wasn't aware of that, but I would expect that when you have great wealth, it's usual to see things, your name memorialized.
That's also the site where, according to Maury Terry's The Ultimate Evil, where the satanic group that was linked to the Son of Sam killings carried out some of their animal sacrifices, dog killings, were in Untermeyer Park, if my memory serves me correct. I might be wrong, but I always thought that was an interesting connection. They served Untermeyer Park.
Huh. Well, if we still had Dave McGowan around, he could probably tell us something about that.
Yeah, some connection there.
In any event, according to David Icke, I tend to believe this is true. Untermeyer introduced Scofield to Zionist bankers, including Jacob Schiff and Bernard Baruch. I tend to believe it because they were friends or friendly with Untermeyer, and all of a sudden Scofield was able to had the money for international trips, which that was very expensive back then, to take ocean voyages.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he's got all this money and all this time on his hands to write this Bible. And he goes to England in 1904, and according to his official biography, which is written by Charles Trumbull, he went to England in 1904 with his wife Hetty, and he ran into a fellow named Robert Scott. And as luck would have it, because Scofield told Scott, I want to write a reference Bible, this is according to the official biography, I want to write a reference Bible, but I don't know who would publish it. As luck would have it, Scott happened to know the head of Oxford University Press, Henry Froude. So now I'm going to quote this official biography of Scofield. Quote, Mr. Froude was interested. He said he would consult Mr. Armstrong. then head of the American branch of the Oxford University Press, Mr. Armstrong was immediately enthusiastic at the suggestion that this new reference Bible be brought out by the Oxford Press, and a preliminary understanding was quickly reached. Mr. Froude assured Dr. Scofield that if he finally decided to place the Bible with them, they could readily arrange a proper contract for the publication in the interest of each party, and so the publishing question was settled, unquote. Now, Tim, this is ridiculous. It's as ridiculous as his admission to the Lotos Club. Oxford University Press, no major press, agrees to publish something sight unseen unless the author is a proven winner. You know, if you're Stephen King and you go to a major publishing house, sure, they will agree to publish your book because they know you're a million seller, you're money in the bank. But Scofield had never written a book before. With one exception, he'd written something called Rightly Dividing the Word of Truth, but that was actually self-described as a pamphlet. He was not a best-selling author. They had not seen the manuscript. Nobody makes this kind of assurance of publication unless there's an arrangement in it. Some of the biographers point out that Oxford University Press was owned by Zionist Jews. They were not a Bible publisher. That was not their thing. They published Fabian socialist works and scholarly works and literary works. They were not a Bible publisher. Why this sudden enthusiasm for a Bible? It makes no sense. But I'll halt here for a minute because I don't want to, dominate the conversation. But I'm going to bring up Catholicism next, which may interest you.
Well, I mean, yeah, this serendipity that he enjoys in his career, just bumping into influential people. They all seem anxious to sponsor him.
And it's another indication that there are hidden hands. Ever since he got out of the St. Louis jail, it seems there are hidden hands that made some kind of an arrangement for him. Nobody gets,
I mean, did they like identify some sort of talent in him to evangelize, to promote, kind of a salesman, showman?
I don't think he particularly possessed that. I mean, he was known as a pastor.
Yeah.
And every pastor has to have a certain amount of rapport in order to relate to a congregation. But he was not somebody he attended Dwight L. Moody's evangelical crusades, but I don't recall that he was a tent crusader or something like that, that he would attract the attention of or approval of a publishing house. But let's mention where the Catholics come in. Now, I mentioned that it was necessary to have the Christian community agree for the Zionists to take over Palestine. Now, obviously, there's more than one branch of Christianity, and a major one is Catholicism. So in January of 1904, Theodor Herzl, who had been running these Zionist congresses in Switzerland, went to see Pope Pius X. And he asked if the Pope would bless the Zionist plan to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And Pope Pius X very politely told him no. He told them very polite, as I put it in my article, he told them very politely what he could do with his plan. He was very polite about it, but he said, no, the Catholic Church could not endorse such a plan. We're not against Jews visiting Palestine, but we cannot endorse Jews taking over Palestine. Well, you can be sure to set off alarm bells for the Rothschilds. The Catholics were now out. They were not going to fall in with this plan.
Well, but little historical perspective here. What year was this?
This is January. The date of the meeting was January the 26th, 1904.
Okay, so deal geopolitics here. So at this time, the Ottoman Empire rules over Palestine, correct?
That is correct. Okay. That is why the British have to invade it in 1917. Mm-hmm. That's why you've got Lawrence of Arabia going in. They have to fulfill the Balfour Declaration, so Britain can take over Palestine and then hand it over to the Zionists. Okay. That's actually what's going to take place. But the Catholics have said no very wisely, and now it becomes imperative for the Protestants to be brought on board. So I want you to notice the dates here. We don't know the exact date that Scofield went to England, but his biographer says early 1904. Now, the Pope has said no in January of 1904. I'm going to draw the conclusion here that the moment the Pope said no, the alarm bell went to Rothschild and the message went to New York, send Scofield to England, because now it became imperative to have the Scofield Reference Bible because the Catholics cannot be counted on to support the plan. Now, Scofield, when he leaves England in 1904, he immediately starts to work on his Bible. And where does he go to research his Bible? Of all places, Switzerland. And according to official biographer Trumbull, he did 9 months of quote-unquote solid work there. Now, I have to ask the question, why would you go to Switzerland to research a reference Bible? The only reason that one could perhaps come up with would be that John Calvin had been in Switzerland and he had a library there. But to my knowledge, Scofield was not versed in foreign languages. I think the number one language they used in Switzerland is German. I don't think he would have known German. I don't know what language Calvin spoke. But in any event, it's not a place you would expect him to go to research a reference Bible. However, it was where the Zionist congresses were being held. I should mention, though, that he apparently did not actually meet Herzl face-to-face. Herzl died in July of 1904, which is shortly before Scofield would have arrived in Switzerland. Nonetheless, I'm sure there were many other Zionists still hanging about from the congresses. Also, Switzerland is considered the center of Freemasonry, and, of course, it's the big center of banking, where all those Swiss bank accounts have their homes. So
Freemasonry and banking, huh?
Yeah, I'll just mention some other possible explanations. So 1905, he heads back to America. Then 1906, he's back to New York and apparently Switzerland, according to some sources. 1907, he signs the final publishing contract. And in 1909, the very first edition of the Scofield Reference Bible comes out. So as we were saying before, Tim, he produces his Bible awfully quickly. For most people, they need to spend a lifetime on this. For him, it's taken less than 5 years. It would appear that he did have other people helping dictate the notes, but I don't doubt that some of it he wrote himself and borrowing, again, from people like Dorabine. I want to talk a little bit about the strategy behind this Bible. They used the King James Version, but actually, Scofield's favorite version was not the Scofield. He preferred the modern version we call the West Horsecut, which is a very watered-down version. For people who are really trying to trade on the Protestant side, who try to stay true to the scriptures, they do not care for the West Horsecut. I'm sorry, it's a Westcut. Let me get my name straight here. Version. The reason they decided to use the King James is because that's what fundamentalists used. Okay, so that's why. But if you look at the Scofield Reference Bible, every time it disagrees with the modernized version, Scofield had a note saying the modernized version was more correct. Another strategy, which was very important at getting this Bible to influence people, Scofield put his reference notes right on the pages of the Bible. Now, this was a new thing. Normally, people who wrote Bible commentaries would write a separate commentary, separate from the Bible itself. Scofield put his notes right on the Bible. Pretty cheeky. Because what happened is it starts to give his notes an authority rivaling that of the Bible itself. And if people were trying to remember a Bible verse, and they often do, they would tend to remember his notes along with the Bible verse. In fact, perhaps for some people, they would even remember his note instead of the Bible verse. So that was another strategy they used. Another strategy was that they produced it beautifully. I mean, it was a beautiful Bible, beautifully typeset, cloth and leather editions, and Oxford University Press. The reason they wanted Oxford University Press to bring this out was because they had offices on both sides of the Atlantic, and they could hyper-market it, hyper-produce it, and actually, you know what, you can't find a 1909 edition today unless you want to pay a lot of money. It's very rare. The big edition was the 1917 edition. The revised 1917 version is what people read today. It was what sold millions of copies, and I want to draw our connections again here. 1917 is the big year of publication. 1917 is the year of the Balfour Declaration. So now, in the minds of your Protestant Christian, what's happening? Scofield is saying God has ordained that the Jews must return to Palestine. Oh, well, England has just promised the Jews they'll have a homeland in Palestine the very same year. To the unsuspecting Christian, it would appear that Scofield's Bible was showing things prophetically happen right before their eyes.
And God's will is being played out.
Yes, God's will is happening, and Scofield's Bible is on the money because it shows the events that are happening in the world are actually being are taking place as we see.
But behind the scenes, the Zionists are making sure that the Bible is published and disseminated and promoted, and they're also working behind the scenes to secure, Britain's recognition, support for the Jewish homeland in Palestine. At the same time, they're also working successfully to bring America into the war.
That's right. All these things are happening simultaneously. It's a clever plan.
It's not a miracle.
No, it's not a miracle. It is actually satanic,
yeah.
But it is designed to trick Christians into thinking that it's miraculous and it's God's hand moving these events. And, of course, some people would say, well, God's hand is even moving as evil takes place. But the point being that this is not the will of God being fulfilled. This is a satanic endeavor. Let's talk a little bit how Scofield changed the Bible. Not actually changing the words, but its interpretation in order to accommodate Zionism. And to me, Tim, it's almost as if the Rothschilds sat down with Scofield and said in Switzerland, this is what we want you to have the Bible say. Okay, so we go back to the book of Genesis. I hope we won't be boring our secular listeners, but it is important because without this, there wouldn't have been a 9/11. Okay, all right. Just if we connect the dots. Okay, in Genesis 12, God had made a promise to Abram, who became known as Abraham, and he was the ancestor of the Arabs as well as the Hebrews. And here's what it says in the Bible, Genesis 12, 1-3. It says, "Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great. And thou shalt be a blessing, and I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee." Okay, so here's what Scofield did. Now, the thee is singular here. He's saying, I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. It's singular. It means Abraham, okay? But Scofield made thee plural and applied it to the modern Jew. Here's what he wrote in the Scofield Reference Bible, quote, "And curse him that curseth thee, wonderfully fulfilled in the history of the dispersion. It has invariably fared ill with the people who have persecuted the Jew, well with those who have protected him. The future will still more remarkably prove this principle," unquote. As I'm reading this, Tim, I'm thinking, the future will prove this more? How do you know the future is going to prove this? Unless the Zionists are telling you what to write here, how do you know that what's about to happen? Now, I should mention that Scofield did not copyright the Bible. It was copyrighted by Oxford University Press, and that gave them the license to change it whenever they wanted. So they came out with a revised edition in 1967, which just happens to be the year of the Six-Day War when the Zionists seized East Jerusalem. Okay, now they started adding things to Scofield's word. They added this phrase, quote, "For a nation to commit the sin of anti-Semitism brings inevitable judgment," unquote. Benjamin Netanyahu couldn't have said it better. And the Bible doesn't mention the sin of anti-Semitism. Okay. All right. Now, then you've got the idea of the greater Israel. All right. Now, in Genesis 15:18, God described the land he was giving to Abraham. He said, quote, "In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates," unquote. Okay. And now, what Theodor Herzl and his colleagues mapped out at the Swiss Zionist congresses was that they were going to move into Israel, into Palestine, create Israel, and create greater Israel, as noted there. And, you can find plenty of online references that show that greater Israel is demarked by these boundaries. And if you look at the flag of Israel, and I held this flag up for me interview with Dean Arnold, the flag of Israel has a blue stripe on top and a blue stripe on the bottom, and those are the Euphrates and the Nile rivers. And it's interesting that in the middle you've got what they call the Star of David. I'm sorry we don't have a graphics to show, but the Star of David, which has no basis in the Bible, but is a symbol of modern Israel, has 6 points, 6 triangles, and in the middle a 6-sided hexagon, which does give you 666. Now, as I said to Dean, I'm not saying that this means that that's what the Bible meant by 666, but it's interesting that you have this triple-sixed symbol between the two rivers on the flag of Israel. Now, another thing that Scofield did was he made the promise of this land unconditional. Here's what Scofield wrote in his reference Bible. He said, quote, "For Abraham and his descendants, it is evident that the Abrahamic covenant made a great change. They became distinctly the heirs of promise. That covenant is wholly gracious and unconditional. The descendants of Abraham had but to abide in their own land to inherit every blessing," unquote. Tim, any Bible student knows that God's promises to Israel were always conditional. They were conditional upon their faith. And a great example of that would be Deuteronomy 28, where God lays out blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. But in my article, online article, Christian Zionism, I make the point, and I have to thank, there's an author named David Lansdene. He's not well known, but he's written a Bible called Christian Zionism in the Scofield Reference Bible. I got a lot of insights from that guy. I have him referenced at my recommended reading at the end of the article. But in any event, he noted that God didn't even allow the Israelites to enter the Promised Land under Moses because of their lack of faith. And so if modern Christian Zionists think that God has brought the Zionists back because they're so faithful, I have a picture there of Tel Aviv's gay parade with men smooching. And Tel Aviv, the capital of Israel, has been voted by gays the most gay-friendly city in the world. I've got an embedded clip of Israeli television mocking the crucifixion of Christ. They've had many atheists leading their government. Their first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, he didn't even go to synagogue. The guy was an atheist. So are these people more faithful than the people of Moses' day, that God brought them back to the land? The reason we had the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and the curse was brought on them because they rejected Christ. They haven't stopped rejecting Christ. There is no reason to believe that God brought them back. But that is what the Christian Zionists...
What are all the Jewish gangsters that played a big part in the foundation of Israel with the illegal arms shipments and gun running and espionage? With Meyer Lansky and...
I have to tell you that I know for a fact there are no Jewish gangsters. They're all Italian. I know that because I grew up watching The Untouchables. Elliot Ness, I know from watching that show that there are no Jewish gangsters. They're all Italian. Al Capone, Frank Nitti. All the gangsters in America have always been Italian.
A few Irish.
Hollywood told me that, and so I know that that's true. And again, to get, by the way, just to give you an idea of what John the Baptist thought of the unconditional heritage, here's what he said to the Pharisees in Matthew 3:9. He said, quote, "And do not think you can say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. I tell you that out of these stones God can raise up children for Abraham." Okay, that's what the Bible's actually saying. But Scofield...
there was the ethnic pride that played a big part in the persecution of Jesus Christ, I guess, because Jesus came to redeem all mankind, and when
yes,
the Sanhedrin did not like that.
No, they wanted it to be for them only.
Yeah.
Scofield, another trick that he played is he wanted to make it appear that the Bible prophesied this return of the Jews in order to validate the Balfour Declaration and the coming state of Israel. And so here's what he said in the Scofield Reference Bible. He said, quote, "The gift of the land is modified by prophecies of 3 dispossessions and restorations. 2 dispossessions and restorations have been accomplished. Israel is now in the 3rd dispersion, from which she will be restored to at the return of the Lord." Unquote. Now, of course, he was envisioning that Jesus Christ was going to come back, but he's saying there's going to be a 3rd restoration. Now, in point of fact, if you look, there were 2 restorations. There was they came back under Moses after wandering in the wilderness. That was the first restoration, and the second restoration was under Nehemiah and Ezra. They came back from captivity and they rebuilt the city. Now, those are the restorations the Bible talks about. There is no prophecy of a 3rd restoration. But what Scofield did, he would go back to the book of Isaiah, and where Isaiah was prophesying the return under Nehemiah, he would apply that to modern times. And if people weren't, up on their Bible, they would think that he was right. And again, you've got millions of copies of this book being distributed. Dean Arnold was telling me that he said that it used to be that in every small Bible church, country church, you'd find a copy of the Scofield Reference Bible in the pews. And he was asking me, did they underwrite the cost of this thing and make it cheap so people could have it? I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure I could find it out. But they made sure that millions of copies of this Bible were distributed. So people who were just looking for a Bible, unwittingly, they would get a Scofield Reference Bible, and they would be indoctrinated in this Zionist agenda. And then this, of course, the idea was to get Christians to support this return of the Jews to Palestine. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to give you one more aspect of this. One of the aspects of dispensationalism, one of its teachings, is that if a prophecy was not fulfilled in the Bible, then it awaits future fulfillment, and that's not unreasonable. But Scofield really pulled a fast one, and he, in regard to the book of Joshua. In the book of Joshua, the Israelites had come up to after the wander in the wilderness and had taken the land of Canaan. They'd driven out the Canaanites or killed them. And here's what Scofield wrote about that. He said, quote, "It is important to see that the nation has never as yet taken the land under the unconditional Abrahamic covenant, nor has it ever possessed the whole land," unquote. So what he's saying is, they failed under Joshua. They didn't kill everybody. They didn't get every piece of land. And so therefore, the book of Joshua is still an active prophecy, and the Jews must return, and under the terms of under the commandment of the book of Joshua, they must return and drive out who's ever there, to get the land back. Now here's the thing. The book of Joshua says that the promise was fulfilled. And again, I owe David Lance Dean to make the credit for making these observations, but here's what it says in Joshua 21, 43 to 45. It says, quote, "So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their ancestors, and they took possession of it and settled there. Not one of the Lord's good promises to Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled." Okay? And again, if you're talking about greater Israel, the land from the Nile to the Euphrates, here's what it says in Kings 4:21 about the reign of Solomon. It says, quote, "And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines as far as the border of Egypt. These countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects all his life," unquote. So they did rule from the Euphrates to the Nile, and God did say he fulfilled the promise that he gave to the Israelites in the book of Joshua. So these things don't await future fulfillment, and the Zionists did not have to come back under some sort of fulfillment of prophecy to retake the land of Zion.
Now, here, what you have here with the Scofield Reference Bible is an attempt to, I guess, add theological weight to the, I guess you could say, to the carnal or earthly ambitions of the Zionists. Meaning, basically, what they're saying is this is God's will, and they cannot do this overtly because they represent such a small population on the earth. So they need to more or less buffalo or fool the a large segment of the Christian community to accept this. At the same time, the Zionists are working behind the scenes to bring about certain conflicts or geopolitical events that would facilitate this process, namely the First World War and the Second World War, right? All behind, and that isn't to say that they were the only cause of these conflicts. It looks like they, at the very least, they opportunistically took these events to see their plan fulfilled.
That's right, and you're quite correct. The Jewish population being a small portion of the world's population, they definitely needed Christian support. And as you can imagine, had the Pope ordained it, then the Catholic community would have been on board at that point. But for the Christians, since they don't have a Pope, it was necessary to try to mass produce a Bible that would convince the Protestants at large that the Bible itself and God himself had ordained this Zionist takeover of Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back. Go ahead.
Yeah, we took a little break there. I was getting a little tired and hoarse there, but took a little 5-minute break, and hopefully I'll be good to go for the rest of the show. I wanted to talk next about the legacy of Scofield and the damage that's been done. One, of course, has been the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. You had the Nakba of 1948, where the Zionists just drove out 750,000 Palestinians. And I want to quote here. It's from a website called If Americans Knew. The Zionist forces, quote, Zionist forces committed 33 massacres and destroyed 531 Palestinian towns. Arthur Norman Finkelstein, himself Jewish, states, according to the former director of the Israeli Army Archives, in almost every village occupied by us during the war, acts were committed which are defined as war crimes, such as murders, massacres, and rapes. Yuri Milstein, the authoritative Israeli military historian of the 1948 war, goes one step further, maintaining that every skirmish ended in a massacre of Arabs, unquote.
Now, I saw the movie Exodus. I did not see that occur during that movie Exodus.
Yeah, well, apparently it didn't occur then, because Hollywood always gets it right. Plus, Paul Newman is the most typical Jewish person I've ever met in my life, by the way. Let's see. You had, of course, you've seen the maps, the famous maps of the Palestinian loss of land, all illegal. Oh, you know what? I wanted to mention one more thing about Joshua before I forget it. Mm-hmm. It's true that God commanded Joshua and the Hebrews of that day to take out the Canaanite tribes, but there was a reason for that is often missed by people. And I've got an article on my website called Making Sense of the Supernatural that goes into this. But the Canaanites, you recall, were giants. That's why they didn't want to go in. They were afraid because they were giants. They were transhumanized. And if you really study your Genesis, and if you're willing to go a little outside to the book of Enoch, you will find that giants were the result of union between angels and humans. They were satanic beings. We won't go into all of that today because it's a total side subject. But
wasn't Goliath a Canaanite?
He was a Canaanite. He was a giant. And there's been evidence all around the world that's been suppressed of skeletal evidence of the remains of these giants. But you might recall that God wiped out the earth with a flood just because of they were experimenting with species and the union between angels and man had created this race of giants. The world was becoming it was being geoengineered, as we're starting to do today.
Nothing changes under the sun.
Yeah, the Canaanites were giants. They were Satanists. They threw their children into the fire and sacrificed to Satan, and God wanted them taken out. They are not the same as the Palestinians. And this is where modern Christian Zionists get confused about the book of Joshua and think that it applies to today. 40% of the people who were driven out by the Zionists in 1948 were actually professing Christians, and there are many among the Palestinians today. They are not giants, they are not transhumanized, and they're not worshippers of Satan. Please, let's get past the book of Joshua. We are not under it. But one of the legacies has been the butchering of the Palestinians who have lived without rights in Palestine today, have had their property and their lives taken away. Another legacy of the Scofield Reference Bible, we mentioned 9/11, has been false flag terrorism. I mean, you go back to the King David Hotel bombing of 1946, the 1954 Lavon affair, where the Israelites of today planned to blow up American facilities in Egypt and blame it on the Egyptians. You've got the 1967 attack on the USS Liberty, where they killed and wounded about 200 Americans, intending to sink the ship and blame it on the Egyptians during the Six-Day War. You've got the 1986 bombing of Libya, which was a Mossad trick. That is all described by former Mossad officer Victor Ostrovsky in his book, By Way of Deception. It was not the Libyans that blew up the discotheque that caused Reagan to bomb Libya. And, of course, you bring it right up to 9/11 and all the many connections there, from the Danton Israelis to Larry Silverstein to to Daniel Lewin, the Israeli commando on Flight 11, to Dov Zakheim and Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz and all the rest. So that's part of the legacy of the Scofield Reference Bible. And another one, and
also you mentioned Ostrowski. He also claims that Carlos the Jackal was a Mossad asset.
That's interesting. According to Dr. John Coleman, that movie, The Jackal, they made in 1973 about the attempt to assassinate de Gaulle. Yeah. They say that in reality it was not. The movie makes it out to the OSS, the French nationalist organization, trying to do that. They say that the Jackal was really sent in to take out de Gaulle because de Gaulle was trying to pull out of NATO.
Because that's it's sort of like it was like a Gladio operation.
Yeah, that type of thing, and apparently de Gaulle had a strong enough intelligence service they were able to ferret the guy out. But and that also, story's not fresh in my mind. So
also, according to the guy who wrote Prophets of War.
Mm-hmm.
What was his name? The book is over there. Well, he claims that the Killy-Lara affair was a Mossad operation too.
Remind me of what that is. Is that a ship? Remind me what that was.
Like Klinghoffer, the old Jewish guy, was thrown off the side of the Killy-Lara.
Oh, okay. Okay, now I remember. Yeah.
And what happened was that he claims that Barry Menashe is his name, and he was involved in Iran-Contra and all that stuff, gun running. He was an arms intelligence op and an arms trader. Now, this is what he says, and he has he has his word, and these are spies, so take it for what they're worth. But he claims that was it Abu Nadal's group that did that? They were hired by these Mossad agents posing as some dons, some Sicilian dons, who passed money on them and told them to do something awful. Pretty much, and the idea, of course, you could see how it worked out because it was horrible press for the Palestinians and great press for Israel. And of course, the collateral damage was David Klinghoffer, who was murdered.
I get the impression, Tim, that the Mossad must have some secret museum where they have they celebrate and all these things and have reproductions of them that people can view and take pride in. I don't know that. I'm just making that up. I don't know that, but every time I look, it seems that they've been behind another operation that I didn't know they were about. That's the first time I heard.
Yeah,
they were behind.
According to those authors, Ostrowski and also Ben Menashe, who wrote Prophets of War, that it's in there. He said, it was and if you look at it from an intelligence angle, it makes a whole lot of sense. It did help the Israelis. It's a great piece,
doesn't it?
For the Israelis.
We've got a long-standing principle of justice, which is presumed innocent until proven guilty. It's almost to the point you could reverse it for the Mossad, but no, they still deserve. They still deserve.
By way of deception, right?
Every situation has to be vetted and proven, but go
ahead.
It gets bigger and bigger. The other thing I wanted to mention, I don't know how Catholics feel about this, but in my article I've got a quote from Bob Finley, who is the founder of Christian Aid, a very major British-based missionary organization. He talks about how the American Christian support for Zionism destroyed missionary outreach to Muslims. And let me get a quick excerpt from that quote. He said, quote, 50 years ago, millions of Muslims were open to the gospel. There was a great opportunity for reaching them for Christ. Muslims make up the largest segment of unreached peoples on earth, and they're very open until American Christians began to praise Zionist conquest in Palestine. Since most of the violence has been against Muslims, it's to be expected that Muslims in other countries would be sympathetic towards the victims and resentful towards the Christians who support Zionist expansion. Our missionary opportunity among them has been ruined, unquote. And that's from the head of one of the largest missionary organizations in the world. I don't know how Catholics feel about it, but I know that Protestant Christians who take pride in evangelism should take well note of the fact that their support for this Zionist violence has created this intense wedge between Christianity and Islam.
Yeah, well, from the Catholic standpoint, I think a lot of the Catholic Church in the United States has been compromised, I think, by neoconservatism. and its dominance, current dominance within the Republican Party. Of course, they prove to be rather pro-Trotsky, and they can adapt to any political party or ideology. It appears, whether it's Trotskyism or conservatism, things like that. But a lot of Catholics have now defaulted towards neoconservatism in the past, I guess, since Reagan. Because you had in the 70s when Catholics started becoming Republican because of the culture wars and the McGovernite takeover of the Democratic Party and the issue of abortion, and through that issue, the neoconservatives can give lip service to things like abortion, but at the same time, this causes a lot of Catholics to sign on to the neoconservative agenda, which is arguably, you could say, is a Zionist Jewish agenda. And so I think that's largely how the Catholic Church has been suborned in the United States to support the Zionist agenda.
What you said is quite fascinating. That you would use an issue like abortion to draw people into another movement which has a larger agenda of crushing Israel's neighbors and drawing us into gigantic, costly wars. I hadn't looked at that particular aspect before, but your analysis is always spot on.
Well, I mean, it's a dialectic, and the idea is, we'll say abortion is bad, but we won't do anything about it.
Right, it's still there.
And that's the history of the Republican Party, right? That's
I think that you're really nailing it.
And also the idea that an issue like that can be solved politically when ultimately how abortion became legal in the country was ultimately because the culture was lost. And that was done indirectly through entertainment, you could say the Jewish takeover entertainment and culture in the United States. That had to precede, the cultural revolution had to precede the political revolution. And once the culture had been changed, then they could work through the courts. I mean, a good example, and now we're going off on abortion, but abortion laws in the United States weren't passed legislatively, nor were they a result of popular sovereignty. They were judicial decrees, like Roe v. Wade.
Well, you know about all those penumbras that are coming out of the Constitution.
Yeah, penumbras, emanations. But they can also shape the culture. That's the sexualization of American society through music and Hollywood, which the organized Jewish community has a large responsibility for. In fact, they even brag about it. So I think it's okay to criticize them for it if they openly brag about it. You can't,
right.
But I think that's largely how the Catholic Church has been suborned throughout the past few 3, 4, 5 decades, particularly since Vatican II, which turns out was utilized by B'nai B'rith. I think they hired who was the guy Malachi Martin. I think was he had some ties to the Jewish community, and there's also John Courtney Murray, who was an agent for the Rockefellers.
We have to have more discussions of this. Actually, when I was talking about modernism, you'll have to pardon me. I meant to acknowledge that Catholicism has had its own parallels, and I imagine that when we talk about modernism, Vatican II would probably be at, or if nearer, but probably at the top of the list of the modernist developments in recent years.
There's a lot of controversy with Vatican II because, the controversy within the Catholic Church of Vatican II is why the document is sound, how it was interpreted was the problem, and it was the Rockefellers through John Courtney Murray who controlled how it was interpreted. So the effect was just the same.
Huh. Well, I should have consulted you before I wrote my part 1 on the war on Christianity, but there's always room for more parts.
Oh yeah. It's multi-layered, and
it really is.
And with the Catholic Church, you had the issue of Americanism, which the idea was the American establishment, particularly the CIA. Of course, this involves the Council of Foreign Relations, the Rockefellers. Henry Luce Empire, which goes back to Skull and Bones, how they were. There's a book by David Wemhoff about the John Courtney Murray and the Catholic Church, It's like a 1,000-page book about this. And he wrote a long article for Culture Wars about it too, how the church was targeted because the church was so, well, it has a global presence.
Right.
This is a part of the Cold War project. And the Catholic Church is more or less chased into the arms of the CIA because of the Cold War. And so the Catholic Church making a lot of bad, you could say, political decisions throughout the Cold War and letting itself be corrupted during the Cold War by the CIA, which you could argue is an agent for, the Rockefeller Rothschilds. So it all goes back to the original article that you're writing about modernism. This is all related.
Absolutely.
I find that your two pieces so fascinating because it complements these other articles and books I've read about this.
Yes, we're fleshing in a very large picture, and we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, but we've got a pretty fair number of them at this point, and at least to start making sense of it.
Mm-hmm. So,
and I certainly think, by the way, that the Cultural Revolution of the 60s, that the Vietnam War was deliberately dragged out to bring about the Roe v. Wade era and all that went on. A lot of my fellow truthers don't understand that. They think that the revolution of the 60s was just like the truth movement of today. But I tell you, I was a hippie back then. I never once heard anybody call us a truth movement. It was about drugs, sex, and rock and roll for most of them.
Well, that's how you debase and degrade the culture. And you do that through trauma. At least one way you do it through trauma. And, of course, the war did that, divided the generations and it creates the trauma. It also it became a facility for introducing drugs into the country, particularly heroin streaming in from Southeast Asia, which these wars all tend to do. Just like World War II did that, too, with the French connection.
We should, I just, I learned from somebody from you almost every sentence you speak. We should probably do a show on Vietnam, but we should continue on with Christian Zionism so we don't drag our audience on too long. I wanted to mention that one reason why, a couple of reasons why Christians buy into this stuff. One is the myth of the Jews being the chosen people, but they often overlook this verse, Galatians 3:28-29. Quote, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise.
This is the issue of supersessionism?
Yes, if it means superseding the Jews. But
the new covenant supersedes the old covenant.
Yes, exactly. Many Christian Zionists seem to forget that. But there's another aspect of this when we're talking about Abraham's seed, besides the fact that the church, through faith, became Abraham's seed, is that a lot of people are not aware that there's plenty of evidence that the current people occupying Palestine in the name of Jewry are not actually seeds of Abraham. I mean, just genetically speaking. But I know you know this. You've probably seen it a gazillion times. But they may be Khazarians. And, of course, Arthur Kessler, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Jewish writer, wrote a book back in 1976 called The 13th Tribe. And he gave a great deal of historical evidence that the modern Ashkenazi Jew, and Ashkenazis are the major strain of Jews today, are actually descended from Khazaria and not from Abraham. The kingdom of Khazaria converted to Judaism as a state religion in, I believe, it was the 8th century. And that's documented even on Wikipedia. And there's also DNA evidence, and that's discussed by Tex Mars in his book, DNA Evidence in the Jewish Bloodline. And in my book, Truth of the Lonely Warrior, I do quote the New York Times, where they substantiate DNA evidence linking modern Jews, at least some of them, to Khazaria rather than ancient Palestine. So what the meaning of that is that even if the Scofield was right about Abraham's seed having some sort of unconditional claim on this land, if they're not Abraham's seed genetically, then they still don't have it. But another thing, too, has been within Christians, I often hear the phrase Judeo-Christianity, and there is this idea amongst Christians that we live in Judeo-Christian harmony with the rabbis and the Jewish people. And I have to say that this is one of our caveats. but I didn't give at the beginning. We are not criticizing all Jews. My father was Jewish. He was completely Americanized. He never went to synagogue. I didn't even know he was Jewish until I was over 20 because he didn't like to talk about it. And all his friends were American, and his biggest concern in life was not Israel. His biggest concern was whether or not the Red Sox would win the pennant. And there are plenty of Jews just like that. They don't care a fig about Jerusalem. But amongst other Jews, there are organized Jews, Talmudic Jews, Kabbalistic Jews, Kabbalah being Jewish mysticism, that are very racist and very tribalistic. And these are the Zionists.
And these are the powerful ones.
Right. These are the Rothschilds.
Yeah.
And they follow the Talmud. It's as far as there's a mistake made by many Christians, which is they believe that modern Jews follow what we call the Old Testament and what the Jew would call the Tanakh. But actually, they don't follow the Tanakh. They follow the Talmud. Now, the Talmud.
And this goes back to the destruction of the temple and the dispersion, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Jesus condemned. Who did he condemn? Constantly condemned the Pharisees who were teaching the oral law, which negated the law of God. The Talmud is the written form of the oral law, which evolved over many centuries and became worse and worse over time. The Talmud actually says that Jesus is in hell boiling in excrement. It says that Mary was a whore. It says that Gentiles are donkeys. It says that a Jew may lie to a Gentile, and on and on.
This was codified like in the 7th century or something?
I don't know if there was a particular century where it... Oh, there would have been a century it was codified. I'm not sure if it's the 7th or not. But an excellent book to read on it is Judaism's Strange Gods by Michael Hoffman. That was a game changer for me. And another book that Tex Mars recently came out is called Holy Serpent of the Jews. He talks about the whole history of the Talmud and its relationship to Freemasonry and the New Age movement and to mysticism.
Now, there's one thing I want to point out is
yes.
The Catholic Church did not know the Talmud existed till about the 13th century. Till I think it was Gregory the Ninth was informed on it.
I believe I read that.
Yeah, there was a Jewish convert to Christianity. I think Donan was his name. I read this first in last year. I read E. Michael Jones's book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, and he has a chapter he calls "Rome Discovers the Talmud." And of course, you mentioned the culminating insults that the Talmud dishes out to Christianity. About Mary being Jesus born in excrement. Mary was a prostitute, and Jesus was a illegitimate son of a Roman soldier.
Right.
And when the church found out about this, it had some questions. So there was an inquiry conducted by the church, and they invited a rabbi to explain this to them. And I only mention this because it's a very funny part of this book. I hope I can find it. I forget the rabbi. Yehiel was the rabbi, and he was presented with these pronouncements of the Talmud. Jesus boiling the excrement, Mary being a whore, Jesus being an illegitimate son of a Roman soldier, and how Christians are to be treated by Jews and things like that. And Rabbi Yehiel, I'll read it to you. He says the rabbi was dumbfounded that he had to defend Jewish esoteric writings in a hostile environment. So nothing like this ever happened before. Rabbi Yehiel, lacking any precedent for conducting a disputation of this sort, didn't know how to respond. When asked whether it were true that the Talmud claimed Jesus was condemned to an eternity in hell, immersed in boiling excrement, and Mary, his mother, was a whore, the rabbi could only respond, yes, those passages were in the Talmud, but they did not refer to that Jesus or that Mary. Not every Louis born in France is the king of France, Yehiel maintained, giving new meaning to the term chutzpah. Has it not happened, he continued, that two men were born in the same city and had the same name and died in the same manner? There are many such cases. One Jewish historian referred to Rabbi Yehiel's denial as the birth of Jewish humor. I thought that was a nice description of the discovery of the Talmud by the Catholic Church in the 13th century.
And a tribute to Jewish secrecy that the Romans didn't find out about it for more than 1,000 years.
Yes.
But in any event, this is why Jewish people, and you can refer to Brother Nathaniel on this, people who are interested. Brother Nathaniel is Jewish, born and raised. He's now a Orthodox Christian. He explains that Jews were not kicked out of more than 100 countries, or at least 100 times from different countries and locations, because of some sort of global anti-Semitism. It was because of their Talmudic behavior, their own endemic racism, their belief that they had the right to steal, to lie to, in cases even kill Gentiles. And this is why they were expelled so many times. And even Martin Luther wrote extensively on them, and you'll see Christians falling all over themselves for his supposed anti-Semitism, but he was just describing what he observed. But even today, Rabbi Kook the Elder, first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of British Palestine, said, quote, "The difference between a Jewish soul and the souls of non-Jews is greater and deeper than the difference between a human soul and the souls of cattle," unquote. I have the references for these in my article.
Now, what the Talmud does is it creates a sort of a dialectic loop where it encourages bad behavior, which creates a reaction.
Right, which gets you the pogrom, and then Hollywood tells you it's all anti-Semitism.
But from a rabbinical standpoint, and this is how this was explained to me, is from the rabbinical standpoint, is this creates a group cohesion among Jews and keeps them ghettoized, if not actual, but psychologically ghettoized, right?
A very clever plan.
Yeah.
That's right. There's nothing that drives people closer together and bonds them together like having a common enemy. So if you're being persecuted together, you will bond and stay together until that day comes when the Rothschild plan for Greater Israel can come about. They
stay alienated, and then, because when you become alienated from the host society, you tend to create what E. Michael Jones says, it fosters a revolutionary spirit because you become subversive, and you see the host society as being a threat. So you always have to connive or trick to get around it to survive. And at the same time, what that means is many people. What it means is many of them literally think they're threatened, right? So, yeah, it's a great trick. You've seen that documentary, Defamation?
I have not.
It's made by a Jew. I forget his name, but it talks about these Jews that go to Poland to do the Auschwitz tour, the Poland, and they're I guess you could say they're chaperoned by intelligence operatives, and throughout this whole trip, they're being told that the Poles. They want to, they hate them. They want to kill them, and all this stuff. And so this convinced these Israeli students that the whole world hates them.
That sounds like the strategy.
Yeah, that's the rabbinical Talmudic strategy. That's what it sounds like. Yeah. So, But anyway, go ahead.
Well, we were talking about Judeo-Christianity. And that this is in the mind of the Christian, but not in the mind of most rabbis. Israeli Rabbi Yaakov Perrin said, 1994, quote, 1 million Arabs are not worth a Jewish fingernail, unquote. And Rabbi Saadia Grama said in his 2003 book, Jewish Superiority and the Question of Exile, quote, the Jew by his source and his very essence is entirely good. The Goy, meaning non-Jews, by his source and his very essence is completely evil. This is not simply a matter of religious distinction, but rather of two completely different species, unquote. We could go on, but the point being that...
how does this affect, these are the statements of these are the utterances or the proclamations of these rabbis and all that stuff. How does it affect the average Jew? The Jew goes to work every day. Are they taught this in rabbinical school? Does this actually affect how they look at the society in general?
I think that it depends on the Jew. I think there are many of what are called the lesser brethren, people like you were describing who go to Poland and visit a Holocaust museum, who do believe that they are the victims of anti-Semitism and have no idea. I think it's kind of similar to Freemasonry, where you have degrees and upper levels, and people at the top who know what the game is, and the lower level of Freemasons will defend it and say that Freemasonry is nothing but an innocent brotherhood of a fraternal organization that serves to do benevolence towards society. Again, my father, he never talked about it, but he certainly wanted nothing to do with Judaism. And certainly I've had a number of Jewish friends. I mean, when I was in my 20s, living in Boston, I had two roommates. One was Jewish. I was half Jewish. And another roommate named Wagner, who was blue-eyed, blonde-haired guy of German descent. And we just went to sports games together and movies together and talked about girls, just three American guys. And so, I have to say there are many Jews who are certainly not feeling this way. But I wanted to demonstrate that there is this attitude amongst a number of organized Jews. I recall a day when I was walking through, I used to live in Brookline, Massachusetts, and one day I saw these rabbinical-looking guys, obviously recruiting for something. And one of them came up to me and he said, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "Well, I'm half Jewish." And he said, with a sly look in his face, "On whose side?" And I said, "On my father's." Well, I didn't know it at the time, but it's only if your mother is a Jew that you consider Jew. So he turned his back with the biggest, most arrogant smirk I've ever seen in my life, and I didn't understand why at the time. He turned his back on me, as if to rub his heels in the dirt against me, because I was not a true Jew. So there's definitely this racist attitude amongst some. Yet I've been perfectly good friends with other Jews who don't hold any such attitude. So there's no way we can generalize about it, but it definitely has played a deciding hand in the creation of the state of Israel.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
World affairs today.
People cite the Talmud, and the Talmud, it does exist. It is there. It is a problem we have to deal with. I suspect what it does is, obviously, you said the different levels and the different people follow it to different degrees, but it has to have even a mild effect on if you're Jewish, your consciousness as a Jew and your attitude towards other people, and it exists in degrees. It has to. Like where you're taught this, but in the back of your mind, it's always kind of there. Every group has its prejudices. It is how if you're a Catholic, the way you may view Protestant, or you may view Jew. Well, it goes both ways, right? Protestants have certain views of Catholics, and it seems to be unfair to look at the Talmud and say, well, all Jews think this way.
It would absolutely be unfair. But as you say, some of this has certainly trickled down, I think, to the average Jewish person has inherited some of this outlook if he's gone to synagogue.
And certainly the narrative of the victimized, oppressed Jew, particularly the Holocaust narrative,
right,
which I think has largely been mythologized, based or exaggerated. It's a gross distortion of what really happened, in my opinion. What I'm saying is, nevertheless, is the vast majority of Jews believe the official narrative, and if you believe that in narrative, you can understand their reaction, right?
Correct, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's very important that when you're talking to a Jew, not to necessarily think that he was didn't believe in the Holocaust, but just lying about it.
Yeah.
Because most of them do believe the narratives that they've been taught. Yeah.
As do most people, because that's the history
Right.
they've been taught. Most people don't scrutinize the history they're taught. They read the textbooks. They watch. Most people experience history through the movies and TV and popular culture, and so so it's you have to be careful when you're talking about this issue or any other related issues, that you're dealing with a lot of people who sincerely believe of these things as being true, and they're reacting to their perception of reality. It's not that they're deceptive or they're conspiratorial and
Right.
Yeah.
Same thing with the Freemasons. Again, as an analogy, there are these upper-level Masons who are, they call them illuminated, and they belong to what they call the Palladium Rite. They're totally conscious of the Luciferian nature of what they're doing. Yet, even at the 33rd degree, there are Masons who don't understand that because of the labyrinth that Freemasonry is. So, there's no way you can generalize about these people. But it is important for us to know the history of their teachings and what has resulted in the state of Israel and all the gross consequences. I mean, the Rothschilds really being behind most of the world's major wars, certainly behind the world wars, dreadful consequences for the world at large as we find ourselves perhaps knocking on a third world war after countless unnecessary wars fought in the Middle East on Israel's behalf, and these false flag terror operations, 9/11 being the defining moment for our culture in this century, we're talking about something very significant here, even if the average Jew has no comprehension of it.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to just mention...
there's one to that point. In the introduction to E. Michael Jones's book, talking about Jews as a political entity, as a group, as an organized community, and he stated it well here. Let me think here. Calling a Jew may or may not be prima facie evidence of anti-Semitism, but criticizing a group of people as Jews is regularly taken as such evidence. This is because it indicates that the group exists, that it has definable beliefs, at least in many contexts, and that it can, therefore, act in a certain way, and can be criticized for so acting. All of this does not change the fact that the main task of confronting anyone who decides to write about the Jews is to define precisely what he means by that term. It is precisely in that manipulation of the term Jew that its political benefits lie. And so, that's the term where anytime you criticize Jewish people or Jewish organization, it doesn't necessarily make you anti-Semitic. It means you're just criticizing them for whether their beliefs or their policies they're advocating or their behavior, and just holding them accountable like with any other human being.
Right, and with any other race, exactly.
So there you go. And of all people, because the masters of critique have been the Jews, critiquing Christian society. So, like I said, turnabout's fair play. Read The Authoritarian Personality and what the American Jewish Committee had to say, Theodore Adorno and the Frankfurt School had to say about the traditional Catholic family, how it had to be destroyed in order to save the country from falling into fascism. Now,
there's racism for you.
Yes, ethnic warfare.
An attitude of ethnically cleansing or destroying a type of people.
Yeah. I thought I'd add that part. So I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. What were you saying?
Well, I think we've gone kind of a long time. There's some parts of my article I'm just going to skip over, but I wanted to mention one thing, which is that Christians are actually getting prepared I believe, to worship the Antichrist, which is, something the Bible tells us not to do. And, when I was young as a Christian, I was reading different versions of the Bible. I noticed something. I noticed that in the older versions of the Bible, like the King James, Jesus said he was going to return at the end of the world. And the modern versions, the NIV and, the others, they all said that he would return at the end of the age. And I thought, well, why do some say the age and some say the world? Well, it turns out this is the inheritance of dispensationalism. Jesus did say he would return at the end of the world. But for this Jewish messianic antichrist figure to rise and rule from a rebuilt temple, they had to change it to age, because we're just in the sixth age now, and Jesus is going to come at the end of this particular age, before the end of the world. Let's see. Scofield wrote, upon his return, the king will restore the Davidic monarchy in his own person, regather dispersed Israel, establish his power over all the earth, and reign 1,000 years, unquote. That is Scofield. And I was talking to Dean Arnold, and Brother Nathaniel, I noted to him, said the same thing. This is a rebirth of a Jewish heresy called Chiliasm, which said that there would be a Jewish monarch who would rule the world for 1,000 years. The point I would make here is that as far as Jesus ruling in the temple for 1,000 years, I've heard this many, many times, you have to look at what Jesus actually did. When he was here on earth, they tried to make him a king many times, and he always refused. I mean, you take a look, John 6:15, it says, when Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone, unquote. And what did Jesus say? He said, my kingdom is not of this world. Mm-hmm. But we're being told the opposite. We're being told his kingdom will be of this world. And there's a lot of contradictions if you start to think about this. When you ask your average evangelical Christian today, what's going to happen when you die? And they'll say, well, I'm going to go to heaven and be with Jesus forever. Okay, you've got a problem now, because if Jesus is going to come back and reign on earth for 1,000 years, you're going to be separated from Jesus for 1,000 years. I mean, the way the brother Nathaniel says it, he says, which is Jesus can have an email address. The 1,000-year reign actually comes out of a single passage in Scripture, which is Revelation 21-6. And as you know, Revelation contains a lot of symbolic language. What I comment in my article is very dangerous for any church to base its doctrine upon a single passage of Scripture. You've got to have other confirmations. Now, they'll try to bring in passages from Isaiah where it says that, peace will come out of Zion or something like that, and they'll try to apply it here. But there's only one passage that talks about a 1,000-year reign of Christ. And I was attending a fundamentalist church, Tim, and one day the teacher in Sunday school was teaching from the book of Ezekiel. He was teaching us that, the book of Ezekiel described a temple that was never built in ancient Israel. So he said, he used the old Scofield argument. If it wasn't fulfilled then, it'll be fulfilled in the future. And he said that Jesus is going to reign the world for 1,000 years from this Ezekiel temple that's going to be rebuilt. And so I started looking at the book of Ezekiel, and here's what it says. It says, quote, also one sheep is to be taken from every flock of 200 from the well-watered pastures of Israel. These will be used for the grain offerings, burnt offerings, and fellowship offerings to make atonement for the people, unquote. Now, Timothy, if people know their scripture, and a Bible teacher should know this, we don't use animal sacrifices anymore. But this is what this guy was teaching. How many times did the book of Hebrews tell us we're done with that? The book of Hebrews says in chapter 7, it says, Jesus has become the guarantor of a better covenant. Unlike the other high priest, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself. I spotted another passage in Ezekiel. It says, this is what the sovereign Lord says, no foreigner uncircumcised in heart and flesh is to enter my sanctuary, not even the foreigners who live among the Israelites, unquote. So I'm saying to myself, this is Jesus. He's going to, the gospel for all people. How can he not allow foreigners in? Is he going to require circumcision again? Because here's what the Apostle Paul said. He said in Galatians, he said, quote, mark my words, I, Paul, tell you. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, you're just breaking up a little bit. Go ahead.
Hi, Tim.
Oh, okay, lost you.
How long have, what was the last thing you heard me say? Can you recall?
Okay, I'm recording. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
I never cut off.
When were we cut off? Do you know when it was?
You said, I, Paul, tell you?
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Okay. I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you at all. Again, I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is obligated to obey the whole law. Unquote. So I knew this didn't apply. Now, if you look at it, Jesus pronounced a curse upon the temple. He said in Mark 13:2, you see these great buildings, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. And when he talked about his second coming, he said, this is Matthew 24, he said, so if anyone tells you there he is out in the desert, do not go out, or here he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. So, to continue the quote, for as lightning that comes from east is visible in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. So, maybe this is harder for you to relate to, but I got such a dose of this in an evangelical dispensational church. The exact opposite of what Jesus was teaching. He pronounced the curse on the temple. I was being told the temple is going to be raised again. He was saying he was not going to be an earthly king. They were saying he was going to be an earthly king. He said, don't look for me in the inner rooms. They said, do look for me in the inner rooms. And what I wanted to stress here was that the Bible does tell you who's going to reign in the temple, and it's not Jesus. 2 Thessalonians 2 says this, don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. We're talking about the Antichrist here. He will oppose and exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God, unquote. And Jesus said, quote, when you see standing in the holy temple the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, he's warning about the end times there. Now, some people would apply that to, 70 AD, but it's clear that Jesus did not want to be an earthly king, and my concern is that many Protestant Christians are being taught that Jesus is coming back. He's going to, in fact, Christian congregations have been milked for many millions of dollars for the rebuilding of Solomon's temple. And I spoke to a missionary myself who told me, yes, they've got it ready to go. They've got all the musical instruments. It's ready to be rebuilt. I guess they're just waiting to remove the mosque that's on the Temple Mount so they can rebuild the temple at that particular site. And what Christians are being set up for is to worship who the Bible tells us will be the Antichrist, taking him to be Christ. And certainly the Antichrist could pretend to be Christ because, number one, the Bible says that he can make himself an angel of light, that he can do signs and wonders. And, of course, with modern technology, I mean, you go down to Disneyland and go on a haunted house ride. They can put a hologram of a ghost next to you. Well, you can just imagine what modern technology could do, projecting three-dimensional images of holograms of angels from satellites. You'd have a lot of Christians really bowing down in fear and thinking that the Lord had returned. So I believe that there's a great deception coming, and I do believe that, again, this is a legacy of the Scofield teachings, is that Christians are being set up to believe that Jesus is coming back to be an earthly king, and the Bible tells us not to worship the Antichrist. I think we're being sent in that very direction, and nothing would delight the Rothschilds more than to see Christians worshiping their chosen one, their Antichrist figure, the leader that they talk about even in the Protocols of Zion, their big brother figure. That's one of my great concerns.
Well, that's interesting because, the desire for a political messiah or military messiah, that was the initial cause for the division between Christians and Jews to begin with. That's what defined Christians and Jews. Jews are the ones that rejected the Messiah because Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this earth." Mm-hmm. They wanted the political Messiah.
Exactly.
And they rose up in rebellion a couple times, which Simon Bar Rebellion, I think, in 130, and that's this 70 AD, the 130, and this just resulted in the destruction of the temple. And this is interesting to talk about trying to raise money to rebuild the temple. These Christians are raising money to rebuild the temple, but didn't Jesus foretell that the temple should never be rebuilt?
He pronounced a curse on it, and he described himself as the temple being raised up. But never did he pronounced a curse on the temple. He used the figure of the withered fig tree as a symbol of Israel. Never did he say that Israel had to be restored after the destruction of Israel. Never did he say that the temple should be rebuilt. And so we're being taught things that are quite opposite to the teachings of Jesus.
And that reminds me of the story of Julian the Apostate and his attempt to rebuild the temple. He had decided that he needed the support of the Jewish community to support a military campaign I think he had directed towards the Persians, I think. And he also hated the idea that Rome had become Christian. And so there was a big attempt to rebuild the temple, and there was some sort of weird phenomenon where fire came out of the ground and destroyed the construction site and killed everyone in the vicinity.
Dean Arnold I was not familiar with that aspect of history, and Dean Arnold on the show I did just he mentioned that event, and he sent me a link on it, but I have not had a chance yet to
that's mentioned in
to click.
Yeah, that's in E. Michael Jones's book on Revolution of the Jews, Julian the Apostate. But there's also, you mentioned the use of holograms to create signs and wonders, and you can see that happening. I mean, especially given what if you proper political or geopolitical environment, and you have all these Christians now who are trying to fulfill turning upside down. The whole idea of Christianity was that Christ was not going to be a political Messiah, and now they're looking to some sort of Jesus to reign 1,000 years. That's a political Messiah.
Yes, exactly.
Talk about being Judicized, right?
Yeah. In fact, let me give you an example of the Judaism that I've seen taking over Christianity. I can't hold this up. I held it up for Dean. I just got an ad last week from a major Christian book dealer. It says the Complete Jewish Study Bible, introducing a one-of-a-kind Bible that reconnects readers with the Jewishness of God's Word. as if God himself was Jewish. And this is clearly an influence of the Jewish ownership of Christian publishing houses, I believe. And I'll give you another example of the Judaization of churches that I personally witnessed. I was going to a church, and one day a man was introduced who would give the sermon, and he said he was a Messianic Jew. And he said, today we're going to act as if we were a synagogue, and this is to show the Jews of the community that we're in solidarity with them. And today we're going to celebrate the Feast of Purim, as they do in the synagogues. And he passed out noisemakers to the congregation. And, of course, Purim is when the Jews celebrate both their deliverance from their enemies and the slaughter of their enemies. Now, the congregation was playing along with this, and they were, as he would read a passage from the book of Esther, they would blow their horns, or they would make noise and act out and stomp their feet, whatever the ritual was. And I stood there in silence, and I looked across the aisle at another fellow member of the congregation, and who was not participating either, and we just shook our heads. Now, I had no idea of the history of this some years ago. I had no idea of the history of Christian Zionism, but I knew it was wrong simply because the book of Hebrews tells us that we are not to be doing Jewish ceremonies. We are not under the old covenant. But this is another example of how the church is increasingly being Judaized and being driven towards the worship of this Jewish Messiah. I personally think that this had nothing to do with showing solidarity to the Jewish community, because there were no synagogue Jews there to witness it. And I have a sneaky feeling that this person was rather snickering at us celebrating our own funeral, because in the Talmudic outlook, it says that Talmud actually says when the Messiah comes, he will wipe out the Christians. And my feeling is that once Greater Israel has been created and Israel no longer needs the American military anymore, they would have no hesitance or sorrow at seeing America destroyed and the Christian church along with it.
Mm-hmm. And, well, yeah, it's talk about the Jewish takeover, and again, it's you see it in the culture. You see it. I think you can argue economics. You can see it with the acceptance of usury by the Christian church, particularly by the Catholic Church. It used to be that it was condemned. So you prepare people to accept these things, and the big thing is, once you get the Christian community signed on to advocating Zionism, which is political, a political state, and all its ambitions, you're preparing them just for this very thing, because you're changing doctrine, you're changing theology, and you're twisting.
That's what Scofield did. That was the purpose. As I say, I could easily see him just sitting at table with the Rothschilds, being told what his Bible was to say, because he certainly fulfilled their ambitions to the T. There was just one last thing I wanted to make this complete, Tim. I realize it's been a long show. I'll try to be very brief, and that's the idea of the rapture. The way Dean Arnold put it was, "We'll fly and they'll fry." There's this Christian idea that Christians will not experience the persecution of the Antichrist, but they will be raptured up first. And of course, this was really a concept that was really fathered by John Nelson Darby and furthered by Scofield. It was a
Left Behind series and all that.
Yeah, and Left Behind. It's become predominant with Hal Lindsey and other people who have great influence. That just to make it clear, the reason that the Rothschilds or any of these proponents of the upper levels would have wanted this idea proposed would be that Christians are not apt to oppose a New World Order if they think they won't be around to experience it. Now, I'll very quickly mention that there's a passage in Scripture that Christians use to justify this, and it's 1 Thessalonians 4:16, 17. It's for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, shall be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. Now, what I want to point out is that every other passage of Scripture which refers to Jesus coming in the clouds is clearly about his second coming. Mm-hmm. Never did he say that he was coming 2 times. He didn't say, I'm going to come once for a rapture, and then I'm going to have a second coming. For example, Revelation 1:7 and Mark 14. Okay. Revelation 1:7. Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Clearly a reference to the second coming. I'll give you one more. It's Matthew 24:30. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. This is obviously the second coming. Why would this other passage in Thessalonians refer to a separate coming back? The motive was to disarm the church, to make them think they won't be here. But as you know, the Christian church has always suffered persecution. I have a quote there in my article regarding the Chinese church, how they were told that before Mao Zedong took over that they would be raptured out, would not experience persecution, but they did, and the Bible was discredited as a result. We're setting ourselves up for a great disappointment. It's the book of Revelation talks about 2 sufferings, the suffering under the Antichrist, and then God's wrath upon the earth. I certainly don't think God would put his people under wrath who he plans to reward. That wouldn't make any sense. But to say that we won't suffer under the Antichrist when people have suffered under Satanists and communists, millions of people wiped out under the Bolsheviks, under the Bolshevik Revolution, why would we think we would not be around to experience it? That is a deception that was fostered by the Darby Scofield group, and I just wanted to make sure that we at least broached that, because it is a deception. It is designed to emasculate opposition to what they're doing, and certainly is not in keeping with reality.
Yes. What student of Christian history would think that they're going to be excused from martyrdom?
That we should expect more persecution.
Yes.
As this Luciferian, as you see Lucifer on Fox TV, and you see Baphomet's statue being unveiled in Detroit, and you see the transgenderism and all these. You see Madonna dressing up as Baphomet at the Super Bowl halftime show, and all these other things going on. You realize we're headed into a Luciferian age, and you can be sure that the Christians will be targeted again. I believe the Christian church is only tolerated right now because Christian Zionism is needed for Israel to create its goal, to fulfill its goal of greater Israel. We've already destabilized Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, now Syria. Only Iran remains in the way. If we took out Iran, I think they'd be done with us. That's not a very hopeful thing, but as you know, our hope lies in eternal life with Christ and not in what takes place on the earth. But in the meantime, we should be alert to the truth and doing everything we can to make others aware of it as well.
Yes. It's not an excuse for resignation or inaction, but it's a recognition that the powers and principalities are on this earth are always with Satan, but it also means that it should keep us from falling into these utopian or crazy ideas that somehow there'll be heaven on earth, and that's the ultimate deceit. I think that you can have heaven on earth.
Yeah, so, we're with this dollar collapse, potential pending wars, chemtrails in the sky, and autism skyrocketing, and other things going on. It doesn't look to me like we're headed into any kind of utopia.
No.
So the Christian church I just saw, by the way, maybe you know him, Bishop Williamson.
Yeah, from Society
giving
of St. Paul, Pius X Society.
Giving a sermon on 9/11 in Orwell's 1984, and I wish I saw more clergymen of any denomination giving sermons like that. That Jesus Christ said he came to tell us the truth, and shouldn't the church be doing that? Shouldn't the church be acutely aware of what's going on in our world and advising their congregations of what's going on and to be alert to the danger? I just saw that sermon, heard that sermon yesterday. Somebody, Catholic follower of my website, sent it to me, and I was just delighted to hear that. And I said, "Give us more, give us more."
Yeah, Bishop Williamson. He's the one that expressed skepticism towards the Holocaust narrative.
Oh.
And there was some talk a few years ago about the Society of St. Pius X reuniting back with the Catholic Church that they split over Vatican II. And when the Vatican was in discussions with the SSPX about a reunification, they were told that they wouldn't. The Jewish community would vigorously oppose it because of Bishop Williamson's utterances regarding the Holocaust, and of course, then I think it was Benedict XVI at the time was the Pope, and there was a big controversy. Of course, the question was, since when is the interpretation of a certain historical event a matter of Catholic doctrine? And who are you to tell the Catholic Church who they should reunite with? I mean, it's ultimate chutzpah. But you close your article, you kind of alluded to that, but in your final paragraph you write, but much of the problem lies with the churches. Today, many truths about the world events are freely available through alternative media. When informed newcomers come to a Sunday service and they see that a pastor whose brain is hardwired to the mainstream media knows less about geopolitical truths than they do, will they trust that pastor to edify them about eternal truths? When they hear a pastor praising Israel despite decades of atrocities, and that the pastor thus excuses murder and theft, unable to distinguish fundamental right from wrong, will they trust this pastor to lead them towards righteousness? And when we see a pastor we see that a pastor cannot understand clear biblical lessons, or Bible lessons rather, but instead teach their opposite based on the regurgitation of the Scofield's Orwellian scripture twisting, will they then want to return to another sermon? So it's a great way to sum it up. Nice paragraph.
It's sort of the summary of my experience too.
Yeah.
I brought truthers to church, and they weren't too impressed. And I know truthers actually, alt media people who are hostile to Christianity. One reason being Christianity's unjustified support of Israel's crimes, and also the church's failure to recognize the geopolitical realities, and instead simply parrot what the mainstream media is saying is going on.
You're right, because what if the church had been militant, and they say, what if the Catholic Church had told every Catholic in 1917 in America that they cannot go off and fight this war because that is murder and the war is illegitimate? What if the Catholic Church, what if the churches in Europe had said, you cannot go off to the trenches despite what your government says and fight this awful war? You know, how the world would have been different.
Yeah, a lot of things hinged on these sorts of moments and decisions in church and governmental history. By the way, you said that Bishop Williamson was a member of the Pope Pius X Society?
I believe.
Because it was Pope Pius X that I referred to as turning down Herzl on his Zionist plan for Israel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So sounds like Pope Pius X was a pretty good leader for the Catholic Church.
I believe he also was a critic of ecumenism and Freemasonry. So
that would make sense. It sounds like he was a very wise man, and I'd certainly like to see him in office, in church office today.
And I believe as the church has been the Catholic Church has been infiltrated by Freemasonry. It's become weaker and weaker on the issues of ecumenism, and I don't think it's a coincidence.
Right. That was something else that I meant to bring out at the beginning, was that the church, I know, has seen a lot of, the Catholic Church as well as the Protestant Church has seen a lot of ecumenical steps taken in the past decade.
Yeah, and that goes back to your aforementioned article regarding modernism.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, listen, James, we covered a lot. Thank you for spending so much time. These issues are very complicated and also very sensitive. You step on a lot of toes talking about these things because of people's, just notions about what it means. But it has to be said. Anything else you want to conclude? Anything else you want to say?
Just that you're right. Just mentioning challenging people's view of the rapture, I guarantee could set off a firestorm in a church.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I think that we who have been studying these issues need to warn people, even if it goes against their long-held ideological beliefs. After you've been studying these issues for decades and the truths emerge and truths have come closer to me just with some of the information and insights you've shared tonight, we start to get like a jury member, you start to get a preponderance of evidence that shows you what the crime really is. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like a good jury member, like in the movie 12 Angry Men. You got to change your mind when the evidence and the facts go against the conviction you had in the beginning. So I hope that, I know it's been a long show, but I hope that we've made a difference for somebody who's listening in today or tonight.
Sure. And the two articles?
Okay, so War on Christianity Part 1, the War on Christianity Part 2. Part 1 is on modernism, Part 2 is on Christian Zionism, and that's on my website, jamesperloff.com, and Perloff is spelled P as in Peter, E-R-L-O-F-F.
Great, okay. Let's see if everything's working. It didn't check. Yeah, it's still recording. Okay, good.
Okay, good.
I didn't check my screen there for a while. Okay, great. Listen, thanks a lot, James. Good night.
Thank you, Tim.
Take care.
Take care.